environment. So maybe it's time for a cleaner option like electric vehicles, but some companies are sitting on the fence about making the switch.
Maintenance cost of the EV itself, as well as the charging points that we have in Singapore.
Today, we're going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to meet Mike, who's a delivery driver. I'm going to follow him on his route, and he will be using an EV. In terms of the power, the silence, the smoothness of the EV, how do you feel about that one?
Oh, it's definitely very smooth, and the power is good. It feels like you can have a very good dialogue in the car.
Usually for petrol kiosks, right, 10 minutes and you're done. But to charge this EV, maybe you have to wait 30, 40 minutes.
In that case, we need to inform our drivers to reschedule their lunchtime coincide with the charging.
So would Mike and Royston change their opinions after driving it for a day? To find out, watch the full episode on cnagreenplan.com.
At Daikin, we're dedicated to perfect indoor environmental quality, resulting in better health and productivity. To perfect the sustainability of air, achieving net zero carbon emissions. And to perfect the seamless management of air through smart technology. Our expert solutions ensure that perfection is always in the air.
Perfect in the air, Daikin.
Okay, what if I told you that food can help you manage chronic diseases?
Doctors were looking at this going, this is an incredible change.
Or help reduce depression?
I experimented until I knew what food is really good for me.
I am Chef Ming Tan, and I'll be investigating food hacks, diets, and surprising ideas.
Try to let a chopstick touch your tongue.
Watch Food to Change the World on demand at cna.asia.
A national security law changes life in Hong Kong. Almost 100,000 Hong Kongers leave the city to settle abroad. One way, watch it on demand on CNA.
Beneath the calm and normalcy is a nation at the crossroads. I'm May Wong, CNA, Bangkok.
You're watching Asia Now here on CNA. It's time for a business update with Elizabeth.
Thanks, Otelli. Chinese chipmaker SMIC says operations at its Shanghai factories remain normal. That's as the city undergoes a two-stage lockdown due to a surge in COVID-19 cases. US automaker Tesla, though, is said to be suspending production at its Shanghai factory for 4 days. Tesla had to halt production for 2 days earlier this month as China tightened its coronavirus-related restrictions. The Shanghai factory is Tesla's first gigafactory outside the US, producing half of the electric car maker's output last year. And one economist tells us how the phased lockdowns can affect businesses in Shanghai and its economy.
I think overall, in terms of the direct impact, I guess should be still quite limited because in the end, the size of the Shanghai economy only accounting for a small portion of the Chinese economy, right? So if you look at the whole China, in fact, most of the other regions are still operating okay. So only a couple of cities like Shanghai and like the northern part of the Jilin province are currently facing the challenges from the COVID-19. So if you look at the China as a whole, China is a bit like the jumbo airplane, right? So you got multiple engines. Even though one of the engines facing the problem may potentially be shut down, but as long as the other engines are operating okay, I think they should still continue to cruise at the current stage. But I think to me, what's more important is the impact on the expectation could be more significant as compared to the direct impact, because we know Shanghai actually is offering the alternative model, to China's COVID-19 strategy. Because we know in Shanghai, they are running something called the targeted lockdown, right? Even now, I think Shanghai is trying to avoid using the word of like citywide kind of the lockdown. They are using the targeted lockdown. So it worked well last year during the first wave of the Delta variant outbreak. But it seems like it didn't work very well this round against the Omicron. So I think this targeted lockdown can work well, this time. It may potentially offer the alternative model to China's zero COVID strategy. But unfortunately, it didn't work very well. I think that may potentially, prolong or delay China's plan to move away from the zero COVID strategy. So I think this to me have more significant and the long-term impact in terms of the expectation.
While the lockdown in Shanghai pummeled investor sentiment, Chinese stocks swung between gains and losses in the afternoon session. The Shanghai Comp closed slightly above water, while Shenzhen still ended the day about 1% down. Property and banking shares helped shore up sentiment. Hong Kong's benchmark index ended the day in positive territory after performing an impressive reversal this morning on the back of a 12% surge in Meituan shares. Meituan's Q4 results were solid, with its profit margin impressing analysts. Meantime, Tokyo's key Nikkei index snapped a 9-day winning streak, closing lower as investors digested news of that lockdown in Shanghai. The Nikkei 225 down nearly 1%. Kospi is very slightly underwater. And this hour as well, the yen weakening against the greenback. The Japanese yen will be in focus this week after the currency hit a 6-year low against the dollar last week. Traders expecting more turbulence amid global uncertainties, including rising oil prices and policy action of global central banks. The yen has been the worst performing group of 10 currency this year. It's down almost 6% against the dollar this year. And last week, the yen hit its weakest level since 2015. Some analysts believe the worst may not be over for the currency. The war in Ukraine, rising inflation, and the Bank of Japan's persistently dovish stance are expected to complicate the yen's outlook. But Japanese day traders remain optimistic on their home currency. Their long positions on the yen climbing to an all-time high of some $2 billion. Analysts say, though, the Japanese currency has proven to be less reliable as a safe haven amid the Ukraine crisis. It has instead become a barometer of what investors are thinking in terms of interest rates. As a result, the yen has taken a hit following the divergence in monetary policy between the US and Japan. On the other hand, commodity exporting countries have benefited from a global spike in commodity prices. One currency strategist from Standard Chartered Bank tells us what's at play in the currency space.
So we actually see two key dynamics at play in the FX markets. One, as you rightly point out, is the implications of higher commodity prices onto the foreign exchange markets. And essentially, you expect the commodity exporters to do relatively better than commodity importers. The big commodity exporters in the developed world are essentially Australia, Canada, New Zealand. We are quite positive on those currencies. In Asia, most of Asia is actually net commodity importer. There are only two exceptions, Malaysia and Indonesia. So we do expect Indonesian rupiah, for example, to continue to perform well because of its commodity exports. On the other side of the argument is essentially the commodity importers. The big commodity importers in Asia are essentially your likes of Thailand, Philippines, India. I think those currencies probably are going to remain under pressure. The other dynamic which is also happening at the same time in FX markets is that the Fed has turned exceptionally hawkish, and markets are now pricing in a good chance of a 50 basis points hike over the next two meetings, at each of the meetings, in fact. And that probably means that the low-yielding currencies are likely to be under pressure. And you rightly mentioned that Japanese yen, which is a low-yielding currency, a commodity importer, that is facing up the brunt of the pressure. In Asia, that also means the likes of, again, Taiwan dollar, Thai baht, the low-yielding commodity importers will be under significant pressure.
Our Singapore online marketplace Shopee is closing down its Indian operations. Its parent company Sea Limited blames global market uncertainties, but it says other global operations are not affected. It was just a few weeks ago that Shopee had pulled out of France. Now, Shopee launched in India last October as part of an international push. It says it will work to support local seller and buyer communities as well as the local team to make the process of quitting India as smooth as possible. On news of the shutdown comes months after the firm began recruiting sellers in India. It also follows India's decision to ban Sea's popular gaming title Free Fire in the country last month. After that ban, the market value of the New York-listed Sea Group dropped by $16 billion in a single day. Now, cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, have gained popularity among casual investors in India, even as the central bank continues to warn of the risks of such speculative investments. There's even been a talk of banning them in recent years. But some observers believe the government is starting to show some signs of accepting the digital assets, with plans to tax profits on them at 30% from the 1st of April. Rebecca Bundan reports from Mumbai.
Everald D'Souza started buying cryptocurrencies when the pandemic set in. His work as a photographer had dried up due to COVID-19 restrictions, as weddings and other events were put on hold, and he had time on his hands. He now has a few $1,000s worth of the digital assets, including Bitcoin and Ethereum. Although his portfolio has had its ups and downs, Everald says overall he's made money on the risky holdings. But he is concerned that regulations for the sector have yet to be decided upon.
There's always this uncertainty, with the Indian government. Some things that they don't understand, they just decide to ban it. And, that's what I do not like about the current situation in India.
Despite this, Everald's one of an estimated 20 million investors in India who have bought into cryptocurrencies worth some $6 billion. Data from crypto research firm Chainalysis reveals India is one of the largest cryptocurrency markets in Asia and one of the fastest expanding in the world, up more than 600% in the year to July 2021.
This is despite ongoing warnings from the country's central bank, the RBI, about the risks of such speculative investing. It says these digital assets could pose risks to individuals and to India's financial system.
The government has considered banning cryptocurrencies over concerns they could be used for money laundering or terror financing. New Delhi's working on regulations for the sector. A cryptocurrency bill had been scheduled to be presented in Parliament at the end of 2021, but local media reports say that the government is still finalising the bill. Industry experts anticipate these regulations, once passed, will ultimately prevent people from paying for purchases with cryptocurrencies, but they'll be able to trade the digital assets. The government recently announced it would tax income on cryptocurrencies at 30%, the highest tax bracket. Although it's a steep tax, many see this as a move towards authorities recognising the assets, although India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has highlighted it doesn't give cryptocurrencies legal status.
The important thing to note also is that the average Indian crypto investor is still a small investor. Their exposure to crypto might still be less than $100 on average, for example, maybe much less than that. And the reasons for why Indians are so interested in crypto, on one level are very similar to why people in other countries would be interested in crypto. An alternative asset. Of course, just the boom in the last couple of years of these asset prices has drawn in a lot of people who want to gamble.
All this has led to rapid growth for cryptocurrency exchanges such as CoinDCX, which describes itself as the country's largest cryptocurrency exchange. It has some 12 million users signed up on its platform since its launch in 2018.
Especially young Indian audience who adopt technologies faster, right? They have given a very, they've spent enough time, they've given a higher adoption to crypto, and we have seen increased investment, increased number of startups, increased entrepreneurs who are now very keen to becoming a part of this rapidly evolving crypto ecosystem.
Although wary of private cryptocurrencies, the RBI is working on launching a digital rupee under the central bank within the next year, something the finance minister says will give a big boost to the digital economy. The move would make India one of the first major economies to introduce a central bank digital currency. Rebecca Bunsen, CNA, Mumbai.
China Evergrande new energy vehicle group says it will start accepting orders for its inaugural electric car immediately. Hengqi, the EV arm of the world's most indebted property developer, also says it will open sales centers in 15 major cities across the country. The firm has been struggling to secure external investment. Evergrande told investors last week it was trying to rope in investors to help bolster the unit's finances, a goal it has been pursuing for months without much success. Apple is reportedly planning to cut the output of its iPhone and AirPods devices as the Ukraine crisis and looming inflation starts to weigh on demand for consumer electronics. The company is said to be lowering production orders for its iPhone SEs by about 2 to 3 million units in the next quarter. The tech giant unveiled 5G connectivity to its low-cost model iPhone SE earlier this month. The US tech giant has also reportedly reduced orders for its AirPods by more than 10 million units this year. That's the latest in business. Back to you, Telly.
Oh, thanks very much, Liz. Right, still ahead on Asia now. Hundreds of Ukrainian mourners ignore missile risks to attend military funerals. And later, rallies around the world call for peace in Ukraine.
Every day, the financial world goes through dramatic rise and falls. We'll track the biggest market movers and show you where the opportunities lie. Get the experts' take on the performance of key indices. Plus all the analysis to help you understand forces driving global economies. The daily business news you need, only on CNA. This segment is brought to you by Xeon Corporation.
The Medtronic APAC Innovation Conference 2022 is a futuristic drive towards collaborative innovation in healthcare technology. Hosted with the support of EDB, the hybrid conference was graced by the Minister of State for Trade and Industry, Mr. Alvin Tan.
To go big with Medtronic, I would say that Singapore government is ready, willing, and set up to go big with MedTech.
The highlight was the launch of the Medtronic white paper that detailed drivers and barriers of innovation in healthcare technologies. Industry experts shared their knowledge on improving outcomes and healthcare accessibility through collaboration. And the event rounded up with the much-awaited announcement of the 5 winners of the Medtronic APAC Innovation Challenge.
For Singapore to be an innovation-driven economy, the EDB worked closely with companies to create new products, services, and potentially global leading businesses out from Singapore.
This is a lifelong journey. We have to work with all stakeholders, regardless of what we have done today.
This event was organized by Medtronic.
Malaysia is seeing what many are calling a new dawn. On Melissa Go, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
Updating this hour's top stories. A major U-turn in China as a snap lockdown is imposed in Shanghai. Authorities are scrambling to contain a spiraling COVID-19 outbreak. Also, India's banking and public transport facing disruptions. Trade unions calling for a 2-day strike to protest government economic and labor policies. Plus, Kyiv and Moscow could restart face-to-face peace talks as early as today. Ukraine is pausing civilian evacuations from hard-hit regions, citing the threat of Russian attacks. And we spoke earlier with Professor Rajan Menon from the City College of New York, and he outlines the issues that will need to be ironed out before a peace deal can be reached.
Well, first of all, one has to understand that Ukraine has undergone enormous human suffering. The loss of buildings, of bridges, sieges in cities like Mariupol in the southeast, Chernihiv in the north. So I wouldn't fault him for wanting to come to peace terms with Russia. The question is, are there terms that are feasible, that are acceptable to the Ukrainians? One, of course, would be the question of neutrality, the question of whether Ukraine would be an armed neutral state like Switzerland or Finland, for example, or Sweden. The second would be the status of Crimea and the two, quote, republics in the Donbass that the Russians created, occupied Crimea and created the republics in 2014. And finally, the question of which territories that Russia has seized since the war began on February 24th, would it be required to vacate? I think the Ukrainians would want all of those territories vacated.
Well, Ukrainian officials claim that Russia has forcibly relocated thousands of people from Mariupol. They've called it a wave of civilian deportations. Moscow has also been accused of deporting Ukrainians to filtration camps. But Russian state television is painting quite a different picture and has released footage of evacuees from Mariupol in recreation centers being delivered free food and clothes upon arrival in the country. Ukraine says 140,000 civilians have been able to escape to Mariupol, but it says 170,000 people remain trapped as Russian forces continue a devastating siege. Earlier attempts at establishing safe exit routes have collapsed as both sides trade blame for violating temporary ceasefires. Russian shelling for weeks has reduced the city to ruins.
Я тут. И мой муж, вот мы тут и поженились, и детей завели. А теперь что у нас? А что у нас осталось? Скажите. Я никуда не хочу ехать. И жить тут негде.
Хотелось бы, но посмотрим, как поставить на родину, надо родину восстанавливать. Иначе, а кто будет?
A village on the road to the Ukrainian capital has been all but decimated, the area heavily bombarded. The local kindergarten also bore the brunt, with many young children victims of the conflict. And in another area near Kiev, destroyed military equipment has been seen dotting the landscape in the aftermath of heavy clashes. Ukrainian authorities say they successfully pushed back the Russian invaders and thwarted their plan to encircle Kiev. Russian military has confirmed strikes in Lviv, saying it targeted fuel supplies for Ukrainian troops. No deaths have been reported, but it marks the most significant attack on the city since the war began. Meanwhile, hundreds of mourners are ignoring missile risks to attend military funerals in Lviv.
Я на похороні кожного бійця і абсолютно жодного похорону стараюся не пропустити, тому що це для кожного з нас є герой. Я знала, що сьогодні в церквах буде дуже багато людей. І думаю, так переживала за нинішній день. А оказується, бачите, вчора 2 рази стріляли. І там стріляли, і там стріляли. То було страшно.
Now, despite more than 4 weeks of fighting, Russia has so far failed to seize any major Ukrainian city. The United Nations says the conflict has claimed thousands of lives and that nearly 4 million people have fled the country. The Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine could lead to the biggest crisis since the Second World War. Speaking at the graduation ceremony of the National Defense Academy, he said the core of the international order that took the global community years to build is under threat. And he reiterated Tokyo's resolve to support Ukraine, saying its actions, along with those of other countries, will determine the future state of the international community. Mr. Kishida also warned that unilateral changes to the status quo by force must never be allowed in the Indo-Pacific. Mr. Kishida, who also welcomed America's new ambassador, Rahm Emanuel, to Japan over the weekend, has not ruled out strengthening the country's defense capabilities. He said his government will accelerate the drafting of 3 security documents, including a revised national security strategy. This in light of the fallout from the invasion of Ukraine, as well as developments in the region. These include North Korea's renewed missile testing and China's growing military might in the East and South China Seas. People gathered in cities around the world to call for an end to the war in Ukraine and to criticize Russian leader Vladimir Putin. A choir sang for peace in the Spanish capital, Madrid. It was part of an event that saw more than 1,000 choirs in Spain, Portugal, Italy, Britain, and Mexico sing in unison. The performance was streamed live on YouTube. Singing in Washington, D.C. as well, where the blue and yellow Ukrainian flags were out in force. Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova, spoke to the crowd and slammed President Putin over the invasion. Demonstrators also had harsh things to say about the Russian leader.
I'm against the war in Ukraine, and I'm just very tired of Putin and the way he's been such a bully and a murderer, and we can't stand for this.
Stop the war, please. Stop this crime. Because it's crime against humanity. And I'm really proud that people in Europe start understanding that it's danger not only for Ukraine, it's a danger for whole Europe.
Similar commentary and imagery coming out of Canada's biggest city, Toronto. Now, this event was part of an international charity concert telethon in support of Ukraine.
The most important to end this war is for Russia to stop the war. If they stop the war, then there won't be any war. But if Ukraine will stop fighting, there will be no Ukraine. This is a genocide against the Ukrainian nation.
Islamic State has claimed responsibility for a deadly attack in Israel as the country holds a landmark regional summit. 2 gunmen shot and killed 2 police officers in the city of Hadera, just north of Tel Aviv. Surveillance camera video shows the attackers opening fire with assault rifles. They were shot dead by police officers. IS called it an immersive commando attack. Now, just less than a week ago, an Arab man killed at least 4 Israelis in a stabbing and car ramming attack in Beersheba before he was fatally shot by a passerby. Philippines remains on alert for further eruptions from the Taal volcano, located just 70 kilometers south of the capital, Manila. More than 3,800 people have fled to evacuation centers. Taal continues to eject plumes of smoke, prompting authorities to reiterate their warning for residents to stay clear of harm's way. Taal spewed a plume 1.5 kilometers into the air over the weekend. Officials say the level 3 warning remains in force as there is intensified unrest at the volcano. Thousands of residents have been living in communities near the volcano. All activities on Taal Lake and flying any aircraft close to the volcano have been prohibited. The country's disaster agency warns magma interacting with water could cause an eruption, though it's not expected to be as explosive as the last major eruption in January 2020. Taal is one of the world's smallest active volcanoes. Well, despite its height of just 311 meters, it can be deadly. An eruption in 1911 killed more than 1,300 people. Here's a look now at some of the other stories we're tracking for you on CNA Digital. The Taiwanese official claims the war in Ukraine could be an opportunity for China to raise the profile of its currency in a challenge to the US dollar. Russia has said it will use its Chinese yuan reserves because of sanctions. The last European Union train out of Russia has arrived in the Finnish capital, Helsinki. It marks the closure of the last rail link between Russia and the European Union. Israeli and Arab partners have convened for a rare summit in Israel, attended by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who seeks to reassure allies over Washington's diplomacy with Iran. Activists in Afghanistan have pledged to launch protests across the country if the Taliban fails to reopen girls' secondary schools within a week. Schools were ordered to be shut again the same day they reopened. And the organizer of the Oscars ceremony tweets that it doesn't condone violence. Actor Will Smith had slapped Chris Rock in the face on stage during a live broadcast after a joke about Smith's wife. And of course, can keep up with the news in Asia and beyond anytime on CNA Digital. Still ahead on Asia Now. This 12-year-old has been dubbed Hong Kong's Greta Thunberg. Well, he's been making headlines for his dedication to saving the planet. And later, all the glitz, glam and controversy at the 94th Academy Awards.
Militant monks weaponize Buddhism in Sri Lanka and Myanmar for political power.
UN investigators have blamed Facebook.
Bodhgala Sena's full agenda has been anti-Muslim right throughout.
Inside Militant Buddhism, Tuesday at 9 p.m. on CNA.
This April, foster sustainability, strengthen social bonds, and welcome change. Regardless of race, 5 years on, track Singapore's multiracial journey and the challenges the country faces today since this iconic program first aired. Altered lives. Follow individuals as they overcome the loneliness, disconnect, and challenges of life heightened by a global pandemic. Green Plan Challenge. Learn fun ways of turning your neighborhood into a friendly and sustainable environment. This April on CNA. Next on Japan Hour. Japan Hour, Saturday. On CNA, Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo.